Welcome everyone to the Education Economic Development Subcommittee. Today we have a presentation from the University of Baltimore and our community colleges. We will start with UBalt on our agenda, and Sarah Baker is our analyst. Welcome, Sarah.
Yeah, let me just share my screen and start off here. I'm going to start with Exhibit 1, which shows the trends in first-time applicants. And as you can see, after receiving the highest number of applicants in fall 2017, the number fell almost 40% by 2019. Now, UBalt attributes this to the uncertainty around the continuation of its freshman program. For fall 2020, there was an increase not only in applications, but also in the number of students who enrolled, which increased over 50% to 75 students. This reflects a more tailored approach to enrollment, focusing on students with higher academic credentials and those who want to pursue one of UBalt's niche programs. Exhibit 2 shows the trends in fall enrollment, which have declined for the 8th year. Enrollment was down 15.5% this past fall, with continuing students accounting for most of the downturn. And this has been an ongoing issue, students dropping over 50% since 2014. In addition, there is an ongoing decline in the number of transfer students, which since 2014 has also dropped by 60%. All told, as shown on Exhibit 3, this has led a loss of over to half of its undergraduate students since 2014. In addition, graduate enrollment has decreased by about 30% since 2012, which is primarily driven by falling enrollment in law school. We asked the president to comment on the impact of the continuing enrollment decline, especially the loss of half of its undergraduate population, and whether some of the decline reflects a change in student population focus in efforts to stem the decline. Turning to Exhibit 4 is its retention rates, and the effects of the pandemic can be seen with the second year rate declining 4 percentage points from 72% to 72% with the 2021 cohort. While the third year rate has remained fairly stable, it's assumed that the rate for the 21 cohort will likely decline. Exhibit 5 shows the 6-year graduation rates. And overall, they have held stable. The rate has held stable for all students, and the achievement gap has narrowed with the 2016 cohort. Exhibit 6 compares the 6-year graduation rate of Pell and non-Pell first-time full-time students and transfers. And overall, the transfers graduate at a higher rate. But I would note that UBalt seems to have made strides in graduating Pell students, with the graduation rate of first-time full-time Pell students increasing from 26 to 38%. Turning to affordability, Exhibit 7 compares the cost of attendance and the net price. And overall, the average net price is almost 50% lower than the published price. Exhibit 8 is showing spending on institutional aid. And as you see, spending has declined almost 50% or $2.3 million since 2015. And this reflects the budgetary challenges associated with enrollment decline. However, I do note that UBalt is being more strategic in awarding aid, focusing on those with the greatest needs and the high academic performers. Turning to Federal Relief Fund, as shown on Exhibit 10, UBalt received a total of $14.9 million, of which $6.1 million is designated for financial aid. $11.6 million of these funds are expected to be expended this year, and there's a $500,000 budgeted for 23. Exhibit 11 shows how those funds that were not designated for financial aid were used. And as you see, most of the funds, $5.7 million, were used to cover tuition and revenue losses related to lower than expected enrollment. Exhibit 12 shows the budget changes by program area for 21 and 22. And overall expenditures in 4 program areas increased by $3.6 million. And this is due to UBalt reducing spending in 21 in order to cover revenue lost and COVID-related expenditures. Most of the increase in 22 is related to filling vacant positions. You'll note the decrease of $4 million in operation and maintenance, and this is due to a transfer to plant funds in 21 in anticipation on spending that is related to the recently acquired postal facility. In terms of revenue, in 21, UBalt reduced its original appropriation by $10.2 million, of which $7 million was related to tuition and fee revenues. Last June, after divisions conducted reviews of their operations, $6.1 million of spending was ID'd that could be eliminated, $4.3 million in personnel, and the rest in general administrative costs. And these reductions will be taken over the course of 2 years in fiscal 22 and 23. UBALT states this will allow them to absorb year-over-year budgeted reductions in tuition and fee revenues and increase in expenditures without growing their structural deficit. Turning to Exhibit 13, the proposed budget. After adjusting for salary increases and the deficiency, state funding increases $8.8 million. The general fund increase is $9.3 million, which is slightly offset by a $500,000 decline in the HEF revenues. So increases for in state funds include $4 million for the annualization of the 22 generally salary increases and the 23 salary increases. $3.4 million is to restore the 21 BPW reduction. There's $400,000 to expand operations of the Schaefer Center and $125,000 mandated for the legal education success collaboration with UNB. You'll note that other unrestricted revenue only increased by $35,000, and that's related to tuition and fee revenues. And why this estimate is based on the planned 2% increase in in-state tuition, it is also based on a projected 13.5% decrease in undergraduate enrollment. And I'll just note that restricted funds decreased by $11.1 million due to the reduction in federal funds. So Exhibit 14 shows the impact of declining enrollment has had on the composition of revenues. With state funds comprising a larger portion of revenues increasing from 33% in 2018 to 45% in 2023, while tuition and fee revenues went from accounting for 57% of the revenues to 46%. We asked the president to comment on if there is a break-even point for enrollment in revenues, and if so, what will happen when enrollment drops below the break-even point. Exhibit 15 compares authorized and filled positions between 2019 and 2022. And during this time period, 61.3 positions were eliminated. And I note that the vacancy rate for student services has increased from about 11% to 20%. And this just highlights the challenges of hiring and retaining these frontline positions who deal directly with the students. There is one issue regarding the task force recommendations. In February 2020, UBALT released a plan realigning the institution in which the actions were centered around 4 goals, and they're listed at the top of the page. Afterwards, the president asked the chancellor to clarify how the regions viewed UBALT within the rest of the system. So the task force was established, which was to provide recommendation about UBALT's future operations and mission. The recommendations focused on key areas, including identity, enrollment management, and financial responsibility. While progress is being made in implementing some of the recommendations, UBALT does note that the financial impact of continuing enrollment decline has limited its available resources and thereby will take longer to reverse the downward trend. They are also strategically using what funds they do have to invest in priority projects, such as developing a new website. And UBALT also acknowledges the lack of consistent leadership in enrollment management is also part of the reason they have not been able to reverse the downward trend. And we asked the president to comment on the challenges to implementing the task force recommendation, the impacts of the pandemic, and if it resulted in changes to the academic and business models. And finally, the recommendation is just to see the USM overview for system-wide recommendations. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Baker, for the great presentation as always. Are there any questions for our analyst? Hearing none, let's turn to our agency, and I think we are joined by our great president, President Schmoke. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairman Barnes and Vice Chair Solomon, members of the committee. Let me first of all thank Sarah Baker for a very thorough and very effective review of the university. I am joined today by our Provost, Dr. Catherine Anderson, and the Vice President for Administration and Finance, our Chief Financial Officer, Beth Amiot, and also Director of Government Relations, Susan Tabor. I want to just make a couple of comments and respond to your questions. What Mr. Baker has shown is that on some statistics, we've had a very challenging few years in the past 4 or 5 years. There are a lot of reasons for that, but I'm here to say actually the future is bright for the University of Baltimore, and I want to explain exactly why that is. First of all, on the law school, we had a significant decline. There was a national decline in law school applications from the 2015-2017 period, but we've actually bounced back, and the law school is doing very well. Applications are up, admissions are up to the law school. Law school is also doing very well, and it's on the bar exam. And so that portion of the university, which is a significant portion, is doing well. Also, we're starting to see enrollment trends that are starting to move back towards the level that we thought. That is, the rate of decline is beginning to slow, and we're starting to move up again. And some of that has to do with reorganization of our academic modalities, but also the fact that we now have permanent vice president for enrollment management with a new staff strongly committed and working very hard on the enrollment issue. Another reason why we're optimistic, just before March 20, that is before the COVID, we had announced a new program funded by one of our alums, Bob Parsons, who's the founder of the company that you know as GoDaddy. That Parsons had given us a major grant that would allow us to actually advertise the University of Baltimore as essentially a tuition-free, or have for applicants or those who are admitted to UB could come tuition-free by he would pay for the difference between a Pell Grant and our tuition, and this was for graduates of community college, not transfers and before graduation, but graduates of a community college. And so, as you know, the difference in between the maximum Pell Grant and our tuition at that time was about $2,000 or $2,500. The money that Bob Parsons gave us would actually close that gap. That was grant was well received by the community college community, but unfortunately, it came right before COVID hit, and so we think that as we are moving, towards a post-pandemic period, that we will start to see the benefits of that. Should also mention that we are in consultation and with to create a strong collaboration with the Community College of Baltimore County on a dual enrollment program that I don't know if Dr. Kertonitis will talk about that later, but it's something that we have always worked well together, but we think that we can actually smooth the path towards from a transition from community college to the University of Baltimore through this dual enrollment idea. It's been presented to our deans. They are enthusiastic in endorsing that. Dr. Kertonitis and I, in looking at it, thought that it could actually, if it worked the way we believe it'll work, would have an impact of an additional 300 students coming to the University of Baltimore from CCBC. Finally, I wanted to, two quick things I wanted to mention. We also received a designation from the United States Department of Education to declare the University of Baltimore as a PBI, predominantly Black institution. This affiliation means that 50% of your undergraduates have to come from low-income backgrounds or first-generation degree seekers with at least 40% of that student body being African American. Well, we meet that criteria. It allows us to be eligible for a new funding source from the federal government. We have already received one grant from them, which is going to help us with our recruitment and retention efforts. Is about $250,000 a year for the next 5 years. But the largest source of money for PBIs is actually in the budget that President Biden has proposed to the Congress. So we believe that we will benefit from that PBI designation over time. And then finally, I just wanted to say that I strongly support the governor's budget for the university system. Included, as you know, in that budget proposal is money for the Schaefer Center for Public Policy at the University of Baltimore. That Schaefer Center has been very active and involved in the community and helping to train those in government service and many other public policy issues that they have addressed over time. So as I said, Mr. Chairman, I know that we've had a couple of tough few years. I also mentioned the coalition lawsuit didn't help us at all because part of the remedy in that lawsuit was to take parts of the University of Baltimore and allocate it to other schools. That did put a kind of a cloud over us, with some people asking whether we were going to be around in the future. Well, we are. We're going to celebrate our 100th anniversary in 2025. We are very involved in fundraising activity. Our alumni are helping us a great deal. And I think the enrollment and retention numbers will improve over the next few years. So be happy to answer any questions. And of course, as I said, Dr. Anderson and Ms. Amiot are also here to provide some supporting answers.
Thank you, President Smoke. It's great to see you. Thanks for your hard work up there. Any questions for our president? We have our resident delegate that represents University or UBalt, Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, President Schmoke. Nice to see you again, and also nice to see your full team. I just wanted to unpack a couple of things that were mentioned just to make sure we have a full understanding. So in regards to obviously the decline in enrollment for the undergraduate component, some of that appeared to happen before the pandemic. I'm sure the pandemic didn't help, but some of that existed beforehand. I wanted to know, I know that you've beefed up your enrollment management team. Was there instability in that role prior to COVID? And then also, what other messages do you think we're getting from that? Because we know the history of the University of Baltimore has been distinguished in professional programs and really supporting adults who are making different changes with their profession and academic direction. So I wanted to know those two things.
Yep, you're absolutely correct, Delegate Smith. A couple of things occurred. We made a decision with respect to the undergraduate body, particularly as it related to freshmen, that we were going to go for quality over quantity. That we made a decision that just because we were looking at our retention rate, and when we had let's say lower SAT people coming in, we also saw a very high turnover rate, that they were not staying, they were not pursuing. We decided that we would go for a students with higher GPA and SAT scores, and that actually it lowered the number of people coming in, but the retention rate for those people was increased significantly. We made it clear too that we had a target. Our goal was to have a university that was 60% graduate and professional, 40% undergraduate. And that got interpreted in some quarters that we weren't admitting undergraduates anymore, but our focus was really on the community college level people, because our strength is really teaching the older student. The majority, the average age, for example, of our undergraduates is 28 years old. So, because we don't have dorms, we don't have football team, we don't have all that stuff that a lot of 18-year-olds want to see on campus, our focus is much on the older student. And that got communicated. We did see a significant drop in people directly out of high school applying to us. We did have turnover in the enrollment management office because we did have some disagreement about the strategy. But we now have someone who's come to us first from Fayetteville State, and then University of Hawaii, their campus at Manaus, which has a student population exactly similar to what we're talking about. Older students, earners and learners, people who are working as well as going to school. And she's put together a team that recognize exactly our mission, our goals, and so we're back on track. And then, as I said, the law school rebounded in there, so that's why I'm optimistic that we will see a slow rebound on the undergraduate side, particularly as we focus on our efforts with the community college.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions for our president? Okay, well, President Schmoke, it's good to see you.
Well, thank you.
Don't be a stranger.
Great.
And I hope you'll keep getting those, student up, the attendance up.
We will. We look forward to coming back with the more positive information on but our support. We do want to thank you all very much. The General Assembly has been extremely supportive of us, and we thank you for that, and that's going to help us a great deal as we move into the post-pandemic phase of higher education.
All right, thanks again.
Okay.
I'm going to turn to our community colleges. Aid to community colleges, our analyst is Sen Klein. Mr. Klein, you're on.
Great, just give me one moment. I will get my screen shared. All right. This time everybody should be seeing the analysis. What you have before you is the analysis for the Aid to Community Colleges budget. Funding for the community colleges in the state is primarily funded through formulas, with the most prominent being the Senator John A. Cade funding formula. Additional funding is also provided to support retirement payments for community college employees. As shown in the operating budget summary, the fiscal 2023 budget grows by $58.2 million, or 15.7% from fiscal 22 to 23. Turning to page 5, we can review the successful persister rates for the community colleges. Persister rates are the means by which we evaluate whether or not community college students are successfully meeting their goals. This includes only students who have attempted at least 18 credits in their first 2 years after enrolling at the college, and then who after 4 years are either still enrolled, have graduated, or have transferred. Those students would then be considered successful persisters. As you can see in Exhibit 1, the rate in Maryland has held fairly level, around 70% for these students over this period. Turning to Exhibit 2 on page 6, you can see the persister rates broken down into 3 categories. Those being students who entered as college ready, students who required developmental courses and completed it, and as well as students who did not complete required developmental coursework. As you can see, the developmental completers persist at a rate that is just below college-ready students, though they don't graduate or transfer at quite the same rate. Meanwhile, developmental non-completers are far less successful at persisting. This emphasizes the importance of students completing developmental coursework. Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows the successful persister rate by community college as composed of the 3 groups I just mentioned. As you can see, Baltimore City Community College has the lowest persister rate in the state, while Hartford Community College has a persister rate that is above 80%. DLS asked the executive director of MAC to comment on the practices utilized by Anne Arundel Community College concerning their successful persister rate for developmental non-completers, and how those practices could potentially be adopted by other community colleges. Exhibit 4 on page 8 shows how community colleges are performing with their students who require developmental coursework. As shown, Baltimore City Community College had the highest portion of its students require developmental coursework at 95%. Frederick Community College clears its students through developmental coursework at the highest rate, with 88% of its students who need that coursework completing it, while Anne Arundel Community College has by far the lowest rate, with 32% of its students completing their required developmental coursework. Exhibit 5 on page 9 shows the distribution of the different categories of students in the state. As shown in the exhibit, just under 30% of students are considered non-persisters. The largest portion of this total are the developmental non-completers, which represent 15.7% of the total cohort population. Moving on to page 10, I'll speak on the graduation and transfer achievement gap for minority students in the state, which is shown in Exhibit 6. This gap is illustrated in the exhibit with both African American and Hispanic students falling below the all students category. Since 2011, all groups have experienced growth in the four-year graduation and transfer rates. Exhibits 7 and 8 on pages 11 and 12 look at enrollment at the community colleges. As seen in Exhibit 7 on page 11, total community college enrollment has steadily declined since 2011. In fact, total enrollment has decreased by 34.7% since 2011, falling to 97,086 students for the fall 2021 semester. Exhibit 8 on page 12 tells a similar story. There has been a steady decline in FTE's enrollment for in-county credit students, which peaked in 2012. As can be seen in the exhibit, there has been a marked decline in both in-county credit FTEs and non-credit FTEs as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and 2021. The executive director should comment on the continued decline in enrollment, identifying potential marketing strategies or academic programming that could be utilized to attract students. The executive director should also comment on financial aid programming in the state, identifying how programs could be better utilized for or by the community college student population. Moving on to the financial impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the respective community colleges. For the fall 2020 semester, many community colleges reopened campuses and modified learning environments so that in-person instruction would be conducted in a socially distanced structure and limited the number of students who could be in a classroom at one time. As shown in Exhibit 8 on page 13, the limiting of the number of students per class resulted in a reduction in tuition and fee revenue, which totaled $28.5 million. When the Board of Public Works reduction of $36.3 million is included, along with continued lost auxiliary revenue, increased COVID-19 operational costs, and other lost revenues, the community college's fiscal 2021 shortfall totaled $96.6 million. Utilizing multiple federal and state relief funding sources and transfers from fund balances, the community colleges were able to eliminate the fiscal 2021 deficit. The fiscal 2022, which is the fall 2021 semester, for that semester, the community college is open with a varied education delivery modality. However, most institutions reopened with all options approach, which included in-person, hybrid, mostly online, and online entirely. Despite attempts to make education delivery as available as possible, the community colleges again experienced enrollment declines. As seen in Exhibit 10 on page 14, these declines and associated financial losses from these decreases, along with the continued COVID-19 expenditures, are expected to result in a fiscal 2022 deficit of $121.5 million. The respective community colleges plan to again utilize various HERF stimulus funding to offset this shortfall. Exhibit 11 on page 15 provides the distribution of HERF spending by fiscal year. As shown in the exhibit, roughly $239 million in HERF spending will be allocated in fiscal 2022 alone. The executive director should comment on how most of the respective community colleges are planning to return to an operational structure in fiscal 2023 without the added assistance of federal emergency relief funding should pandemic-related expenditures and impacts continue into the 22-23 academic year. The executive director should also discuss whether the continuing enrollment declines necessitate a rescaling of ongoing spending to align with lower revenues from tuition and fees. The discussion of the fiscal 23 allowance is summarized on page 16, where Exhibit 12 shows the distribution for the different categories of funding. As shown, funding for the CADE formula makes up over 4/5 of the total funding, while retirement is the next highest portion at just under 15%. Exhibit 13 on page 17 provides a summary of how the declining enrollments at the community colleges, plus the mandated statutory funding percentage increases, has impacted the grant awarded per full-time equivalent student. As is shown in the exhibit, the grant per FTE will increase tremendously from fiscal 21 to the 2023 allowance, growing to $4,750 $57 per FTE, or $1,853, or 64%, over these 2 years alone. Exhibit 14 on the following page shows the changes in funding from fiscal 2022. The most significant change is found with the CADE formula, which increases by $59.3 million. In total, there is a 15.7% increase in aid to community college funding when compared to fiscal 2022. While most of the community college funding levels will increase in the fiscal 2023 allowance, Prince George's Community College funding level will remain at what was provided in fiscal 2022. This is the result of Prince George's County failing to meet maintenance of effort requirements, which stipulate that a county must allocate at least as much funding toward their community college as they had in the previous fiscal year. As shown in the exhibit, had Prince George's County allocated the same funding level as the previous year, the funding provided to Prince George's Community College would have been $5.6 million greater than what was provided in the fiscal 2023 allowance. The executive director should comment on what actions are being taken by Prince George's County to address the maintenance of effort requirement for fiscal 2022. Moving to the issues, which begin on page 20. The one issue discussed focuses on tuition fees and student aid for community colleges. Exhibit 16 on page 20 illustrates that tuition and fees at Maryland's community colleges have been growing. In 2021, the average tuition and fee level for Maryland community colleges was $4,826, which is over $1,000 greater than the national average. Should be noted that in fiscal 2021, the growth in tuition and fees at Maryland's community colleges declined when compared to the national average. If you'll turn to the next page, you can see the tuition and fee rates by community college. In Exhibit 17, the dotted line is the maximum federal Pell Grant amount that students can receive. You can see based on where that line is in the graph, how much that line would cover. In-county tuition for all of the state community colleges would be met, but only at Baltimore City Community College, Hagerstown Community College, and Prince George's Community College would out-of-county tuition be met. Montgomery College in particular has a very high out-of-county tuition rate. In fact, their rate is more in line with that of the public four-year institutions in the state rather than the state's community colleges. Exhibit 18 on page 22 shows the institutional aid and Pell Grant aid provided. Pell Grant aid is significantly higher than institutional aid, with $107.2 million being provided in fiscal 2021. This data is self-reported by the community colleges to the Maryland Association of Community Colleges and DLS. I should note that the decline in Pell Grant aid provided should not be especially surprising given the decline in community college enrollment that we previously discussed. Additionally, the institutional aid numbers do not include HERF emergency student financial assistance. Turning to page 23, Exhibit 19 shows institutional awards by institution. Allegheny College provides the greatest institutional aid awards per 100 FTEs to its students at 69 per 100 FTEs. Prince George's Community College is giving the largest average amount per student, with institutional aid awards reaching just over $2,300. This may have to do with the fact that Prince George's has implemented a promised scholarship, but you can also see in the chart that usage of that scholarship may not be very high, as it's reporting only 12 awards per 100 FTEs. The DLS operating budget recommended action is found on page 24, and that's to concur with the governor's allowance. And with that, I conclude my presentation and would be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. I think our chair had to step away for a couple of minutes. Are there any questions for the analyst? All right, seeing none, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Klein. Appreciate your always thorough analysis. And I guess we will turn to, we have a number of folks here today, including Secretary Fielder and his team from MHEC, which we appreciate. But I think now we will turn it over to Dr. Brad Phillips from the Maryland Association of Community Colleges. Brad, thanks for joining us again, as always.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee for having us today. Again, my name is Brad Phillips, as the Maryland Association of Community Colleges Director. But if it's okay with the chair, we'd like to kick it off with Dr. Kertonitis giving in some introductory remarks. I will follow with some answering the analysis questions, and capping it and taking us home will be Dr. Williams from Prince George's Community College.
That would be great. Welcome. Dr. Kertonitis, I think you're muted.
So sorry. That's always embarrassing. Anyway, good afternoon. And after Mr. Klein's rather daunting profile, I wanted to just say, take about a minute of your time to just say something special. So I'm happy to say good afternoon, not only to the vice chair, but to the committee members, one of whom, of course, is one of our chief advocates, Delegate Forbes. It's nice to see you. But this is what I'd like to say. I'm the chair of the MAC President's Council, and I'd like to say on behalf of all 16 of the community college presidents that we hope that you will support Governor Hogan's proposal to fully fund the CAID formula. In fact, when Mr. Klein was going through his numbers, I was, kind of doing this with my hands, hoping that the CAID formula fully funded will be helpful to us. But simply put, we are extraordinarily grateful if this would happen. In fact, we're almost giddy. And I want to just say personally, this is my 17th year as the president of the Community College of Baltimore County. And at almost every legislative session prior to this one, I have testified hat in hand in support of full funding for the CAID formula. 29 cents for every dollar the university gets. That was 17 cents when I came in 2005. And of course, this year, blessedly, it is at 27 cents. So we almost gave up hope that full CAID could in fact be funded. And I hope you will allow a former English professor to be trite enough to say, if this happens, it will be like a dream come true. So you know who we are, you know the work that we do, and the role that we play as a key factor in powering the state's workforce needs, as well as helping the state meet its equity commitment. Last year, we educated over 400,000 Marylanders, and we awarded 194,000 degrees and credentials. Nobody else, no other sector in higher ed can do what we can do, and with full funding, we're going to do a whole lot more. That's my message to you, Brad.
Well, thanks, Dr. Kertonitis. I just want to also say thanks to Mr. Klein for the analysis, and it does lay out some of the issues that we've struggled with and how we've asterisked our budget together during the pandemic. And I just want to say, though, we cannot think of a better tool the state has to increase economic and social mobility than its community colleges. And with this committee's help, you've impacted countless lives, for which gives us all hope for the future and well beyond this pandemic. So thank you so much. To Dr. Kertonitis' point, this will be the first time that we've actually achieved the full statutory limit of 29% funding per FTE that the four-year institutions get. And I know that we ask for money, and sometimes we lose sight of what we're really saying, and it's that you're finally, as a state, giving us parity for what the four-year institutions receive. That's the goal. So we're really grateful for that. And like Dr. Kertonitis said, we really do have a diverse population of students, and they do have a disproportionate amount of need, as we've learned in this pandemic. Our students are dually enrolled in high school. They're recent high school graduates. They're students seeking programs to transfer to a four-year institution. They're students seeking instruction and career programs. They're adult learners. They're people wanting some type of certification. They're wanting other non-credit certifications. They're also wanting CT and apprenticeship opportunities. And just like Dr. Schmote, our average age is 24, which signifies that our largest population of students are adults, of 70% of which are going part-time. So with that, I'll stop and begin to answer some of the questions. The first question we were asked to comment on was Anne Arundel Community College's successful persister rates for developmental non-completers. That's a mouthful. But what the analysis does end up showing is really a positive trend. For years, we've had the successful persister model that's shown where students, if they're placed in developmental, how well they do as compared to college level students. But around 2016, we had some really fundamental shifts in the way we did policy regarding admitting students into college level work. We did two things. We created multiple measures for placing students into college level work. And we also developed multiple pathways for mathematics. Prior to that, all students would be assessed in needing Algebra 2 based math. And around 2016, we actually developed multiple math pathways for a college level statistics pathway. And because these analyses are trend based over multiple years, sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge to make the adjustment in the definitions as to what it means to be a successful or non-completer. But what that number is really showing you is that students who were not placed in college level work were only in the algebra pathway, and that the students in that green bar in the analysis are actually students that are placed in the statistics pathway, and they're successful. So we're thinking as the time moves forward and we get to next year's cohort, you'll see that trend playing out among all the colleges because of the multiple measures and the multiple pathways of getting people into college level work. So ultimately, it's a really successful policy initiative, and I can't wait to see how that impacts future degree progress analysis. So thanks for highlighting that. The second question we had was to comment on the continued decline in community college enrollment and identify potential marketing strategies or academic programming that could utilize community college students, and comment on financial aid programs. I'll say the reasons for our enrollment decline is complicated and diverse. Traditionally, our enrollments have declined as the economy improves. So you'll see this differential about every time the unemployment rate moves 1%, it impacts our enrollment over 2%. Now that's true going back to around 2011, but we were really hit disproportionately during the pandemic. It broke that cycle. It changed that dynamic. And you can see that the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on the population that is vulnerable or low income, doesn't have access to online education or any interest in doing online instruction, and it's really taken its toll. However, we think we're getting behind that, and I'll address that in one of the next questions, but we really want to explore some of the options that President Schmoke just talked about, partnerships with our four-year institutions when it comes to transfer, which I think Dr. Kertonitis, you were doing with University of Baltimore, and I know Prince George's Community College is doing with their local four-year institutions. But we really, and this is important, I see Chairman Barnes, you're back. We really want to explore options on working with the Accountability and Implementation Board in CTE and dual enrollment opportunities to help us climb out of this enrollment. And I know there's some interest in that, and we want to align our goals with that board to make sure that we're at the table and it's expressing how we can help achieve the blueprints goals as well.
I'm glad to hear that. I think CTE is a natural extension and something our community colleges can readily handle. I think it's an expansion area for you, something that our state has been interested in that frankly our K through 12 hasn't quite been able to accommodate like they should. So partnering with you is something I think, especially on CTE, is something that as we look and study this issue, something this committee and our chairs charged us with doing that we're going to be moving forward with. So I hope you'll start doing that. We'll start to look at avenues and maybe we can put our minds together. But I think you had more, so I'm sorry to interrupt. I just got excited when I heard that.
No, that's why I said it. I'm excited about it too. And it's a good segue into the next topic, which is about how can financial aid help us accomplish some of these goals. And if you really look at the market population of students accessing post-secondary, at least for us, the majority of students are starting at community colleges, and they're starting potentially as adult learners. They're primarily part-time. But if you look at the policies around how state financial aid is awarded, it's traditionally been for students recent graduates out of high school or full-time and only credit programs. And they don't expand beyond that. And we're looking at federal changes now with short-term Pell and financial aid for students that are not just going into degree programs, but in certifications and licensure. So we think there's a real opportunity here to actually look at the market and who's accessing post-secondary and align some of the policies around our financial aid programs that the state offers. I think it would be a real help to getting some of those students through. Okay, the next question that we had was commenting on return to the operational structure without the federal stimulus funding. I will say that we've used the federal stimulus funding to help us get students in our institutions during a very difficult time and helping them with the services that they need, the technology equipment that they need, the contract tracing that we have to do, and the PPE as well. But we're thinking that the worst of this the pandemic is behind us, and we're really looking forward to being able to return to in-person coursework that won't require some of the severe restrictions and mitigating strategies that we've had to do during COVID. And I think if we can get our enrollment back going, and I think the biggest area of concern for us is the continued support that we get through the CADE funding formula, with that percentage tie remain intact as we begin to grow enrollment, will increase the state's contribution to our funding. I think we'll be able to get our way back to where we were prior to the pandemic. The last question that we were asked was, what steps has Prince George's County taken to address their maintenance of effort requirement? And I think that Dr. Williams from Prince George's Community College has taken this on and ran with it extraordinary speed to get results on this. And I will turn this question over to her.
Thank you very much, Brad. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and to the entire committee. Let me also just thank Mr. Klein for his analysis and for bringing this issue to our attention. It is so important. In the time since learning that, of course, the potential funding was being withheld because of maintenance of effort, I've had the opportunity to work directly with our partners at the county. The county has indeed agreed to meet the maintenance of effort for FY22. On February the 1st, the Council of the Whole, via Council Bill 004-2022, actually voted to award the community college $2.2 million in this year. On yesterday, that was introduced to the council and it passed. So we are really at this juncture at the stage of the public hearing. Following the public hearing process over the next 3 weeks, we should be in a position that by March 1st, those dollars will actually be awarded to the community college based upon the 2 successive votes to affirm meeting maintenance of effort that have already occurred. So we do believe that the issue in a matter of weeks will be fully resolved for this fiscal year. And we are requesting your support that the $5.6 million that would be awarded would indeed be granted. Now, the county is also working with the governor's office. I should share with the expectation that once this political process and the approval process is complete, they would notify MHEC, and that MHEC would indeed notify the governor's office, and that the governor would also, in his supplemental bill, award those funds. So working this from both of the provided angles through this process, aid to the committee with community colleges, as well as the county is committed to working through DMB and the governor's office as well.
Well, Dr. Williams, I'm glad to hear that you're working on a solution. I had no doubt you would, and I know how great you are. Thanks for all your work. But I do think, as a Prince Georgian especially, this has obviously caused some concern. This is not insignificant money. As you know, if the council does allocate the money, we still would have to rely on the governor to be a supplemental. You've missed out. Prince George's has missed out on the opportunity for the automatic formulaic funding. We hope the governor would do that, but there's no guarantees of that. So while we do have a good solution in place, I do think it's important that we try to figure out what happened, how this was missed. So if you can kind of go back in time, I appreciate you going forward in time, but just so that we make sure this doesn't happen again, sort of what was the missing sort of link there between the council, their budget, and you all getting that money to you?
If I had the opportunity, I would play the tape from the council discussion. Honestly, there was just an acknowledgement that they were not aware of maintenance of effort. So despite the fact that we presented it, when we received, the way the county works is they give us a target amount to present our budget to. Yeah. Our targeted amount was 5% less than the prior year. And our response, we noted maintenance of effort. However, they thought it was optional and not statutory.
Yeah, if you ever see, I trust that this won't happen again, because I trust that. But if you ever see this coming down the pipe again in such a manner, I hope you'll tip the subcommittee off so we can scream at the trees that they better get that money in, because we don't want to be beholden to the governor for this funding. We want it to follow the formula and you to get everything you deserve, because you're doing great work with it and you need it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I will do so in the future.
Thank you. Dr. Phillips, did you have more in your presentation?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say thanks again for full funding of CADE. And Also to thank the Secretary of Impact. I mean, just one of the questions that we had was how are we working with other institutions and agencies to increase enrollment and deal with it. And I think just as early as this morning, we're working with the Department of Labor, thanks to the Secretary for reaching out on apprenticeship opportunities for building back the infrastructure based on the federal stimulus funding. So thank you.
Great. And I do know Secretary Fiedler's on our agenda. Mr. Secretary, before we take questions for the community colleges or Prince George's or anyone else, did you want to add anything? I know you're on the agenda.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. I just like to say that the community college is so absolutely important to our economy. You all know that on the committee. You can see their work and the funding levels and the terrible impact that pandemic has had on them is very dramatic. So we need to support them. Thank you.
Certainly agree. Any questions for Dr. Phillips, Dr. Williams, Secretary Fiedler, or their team? Delegate Forbes.
Thank you, Chair Barnes. Thank you, Dr. Phillips, Dr. Williams, for your testimony today. Dr. Kertonitis, your leadership is so appreciated, and I join a chorus of people who are so impressed by the stellar work you do at CCBC. I'm honored to be your advocate on this committee, so thank you.
Super, thank you.
Secretary Fielder, I told you in an earlier hearing that I would be asking this question. Is there any move to decentralize the Maryland Community College Promise scholarships? Decentralizing the program would allow schools to determine the eligibility and award funds in a more timely manner. It's my third legislative session, and I've been asking about this for 3 years. And I've heard again this fall that students who wanted to start, in the fall semester were not told till October that they qualified for the funding.
I would disagree with that last statement. They were notified earlier. We have to wait for the institutions to certify. CCBC had 12 of the 32 that are still not even certified. So there's some specifics there. Second, we have a senator that absolutely in the first creation of Promise was emphatic, as Dr. Phillips heard and knows with Dr. Sadowski, no decentralization. So they can have the internal discussions and figure out the best way to move forward is what I would recommend.
I will circle back around with you if I find out that I
Yes,
have a disagreement with that. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. I look forward to talking through it. Yes.
Yep. And we'll see the secretary again throughout the session. So you can stay on that, Delegate Forbes, and circle back for sure.
Good.
Any other questions for our great team here? Secretary Fielder, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Williams. Okay. We do have some witnesses on this. We have SEIU 500 is here. I think I've seen them. Lou Carloni is on. I believe I saw him on here. And I believe we also have Joan Eveluqua, if I said that correctly.
Lou Carloni is here. I apologize. My video has been coming in and out as we've been going through this.
It's okay, brother. No worries. Just go ahead and you can give your testimony. If we see you, we see you. If not, we'll hear you.
I put up a static image just for the moment. Thank you. I am Lou Carloni, and I'm here today representing myself as an adjunct professor at Anne Arundel Community College and a member of the SEIU Local 500 Union. While I am but one voice speaking today, you should know that there are hundreds of my peers and colleagues who share the sentiments that I will now share with you. It does seem to me that anyone arguing against Maryland community colleges receiving their full funding should take the time to look at the numbers. And you folks have mentioned many of those numbers here today, which I very much appreciate. College administrations have often responded to a shortfall over the past 2 decades by expanding the number of adjunct professors, resulting in faculty like me teaching the majority of the classes, which I think discounts what the students get from the program. Shoring up our institutions of higher learning so that our students can receive the top tier education that they are entitled to is vital to our students, their families, and our economy. Providing adequate funding levels to our students is vital to helping community colleges fulfill our promise of serving as a pathway to the American dream. This is not an expense in my eyes, but rather an investment in our state and its citizens. I believe in the power that our Maryland community colleges offer in transforming lives, as most of you have said today, by providing career education and a strong foundation for future studies in bachelor's degrees and beyond. I know that lack of funding will contribute to a shrinking of our skilled workforce and overall will hurt our local and state economies. As legislators, your promise to fully fund community colleges must not just be a campaign promise or a photo opportunity, but rather it must be a commitment to be honored this year and each year that follows. Students from every walk of life depend on community colleges to provide them with the knowledge, skills, and abilities to grow in their current profession, to change careers, or to advance into leadership positions. I see these hardworking students precariously balance their studies while often working as much as a full-time or even more than full-time, and also raising a family. They depend upon me to provide them with the instruction that will lead to their success. And I'm looking forward to you ensuring that the community colleges have the funding to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Lou Carloni from SEIU 500? Don't see any. Lou, thank you for your work representing the employees in our state. I appreciate that. I think we have one last witness, Sandra Kertonitis. Sandra, are you with us?
John Bevilacqua also.
I
Yes.
did
No, I
call on
spoke
her, but I
before.
don't see her on here.
I'm here.
There you are. Sure, Joan, welcome. Apologize.
Oh, that's okay. Should I wait for Doctor to speak?
No, you can go ahead and then Sandra
Can I
go.
ask you, do I have 2 minutes or longer?
2 minutes for witnesses.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Joan Bevilacqua, and I'm here today representing SEIU Local 500. SEIU Local 500 is made up of over 20,000 working people in Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Virginia. Our union represents the support staff of Montgomery County Public Schools, family child care providers, adjunct faculty at several Maryland colleges and universities, staff at nonprofits, and many other working people across the region. I come here today to implore you to fulfill the state's obligation to the community colleges by fully funding CADE. First, I want to thank this body for voting to allow me to exercise my right to collectively bargain as a community college adjunct. We look forward to a collaborative relationship with the colleges and all stakeholders advocating for what is best for employees, the students, and our communities in years to come. As an adjunct at 2 Maryland community colleges, no one should argue that Maryland community colleges do not need more funding. Funding for our colleges has not kept up with the growing needs for at least the last 15 years. Providing adequate levels of funding to educate students is a critical step in helping community colleges fulfill their original promise of serving as catalysts for social mobility. I believe in the power to transform individuals and communities that our Maryland community colleges offer, and I know that lack of funding will contribute to shrinking our democracy. The commitment that CADE will be fully funded must not just be a hollow promise, but a cash check in the bank, and not for 1 year, but for all years going forward. As my father always said, don't count your chickens until they're hatched. We also ask that the additional funds necessary to allow Prince George's Community College to resolve its maintenance of effort issue with its county and receive full funding as its peer community colleges have, with the additional funds of $5.6 million. As an adjunct professor for 20 years, my observations show me what adequate funding will do. Students from all backgrounds rely on their local Maryland community college, especially as we build back after a global health crisis. Those with the greatest needs will benefit the most when there is full funding. I champion these hardworking students who often balance work, family, and college while still in their 20s. And I look forward to knowing that full funding from the state of Maryland will never again be slashed at the expense of these hardworking students. This must be more than a promise, but a continuous check that does not ever bounce. I and SEIU Local 500 respectfully ask that you honor your commitment and vote to fully fund the CADE funding formula. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joan. Thanks for your work for our students in the state. Any questions for Joan? Okay, and now Sandra, you are up. Apologize.
Oh, no,
Welcome.
I'm Sandra Kertonitis, the president of the Community College of Baltimore County. And when you stepped out just a short while ago, I got to make my few comments, which really were, please fund the governor's proposal. So thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And I apologize I had to step out earlier, but thank you so much for the great work you do.
Thank you.
Any questions for any of our panelists here from anyone on the committee? All right, seeing none, I think that we are adjourned. Thank you all for hanging in there and have a great day.
Thank you.